Hello and welcome to this thought for the day on Friday, the 2nd of October. I was recently reading the 10th chapter of John's Gospel, the point where the Pharisees come to Jesus and try to trick him. They want him to answer some questions in a way where he falls into their trap, and so they can then stone him or have him arrested for blasphemy. And as he goes on talking to them, he talks about how he is the good shepherd, and he talks about his flock. And he says the people of his flock, the sheep, recognise his voice and they follow him. And I started to think about being recognised by your voice. I don't know about you, but there are many times when I have been unrecognisable, it would seem, by my voice. I once answered the phone at my parents' house. I picked up the receiver and said, "Hello," and the person on the other end, whose voice I definitely recognised, launched into a huge conversation with me about the church coffee morning rota. She seemed to fail to pause for breath. It went on for quite a long time, and at the end I said to her, "Carol, that's very interesting, thank you for telling me that, but actually this is Catherine and not Betty." And she said, "Oh, you sound just like your mum when you answer the phone." Well, that's happened several times since. And now, in fact, my own daughter is mistaken for me when she answers our telephone. I used to have an older car, and one of the first types of hands-free phone calls could be made. Luckily now, my new car, it's a bit more high-tech. But back then, I would press a button and I had to say, "Call," and then the name of the person I wanted the call to go to. But it was forever misunderstanding what I wanted. If I said, "Call Bob," it would then reply, "Calling home." And I'd say, "No, call Bob." But it never did. I had a friend and colleague called Amanda, and if I pressed the button and said, "Call Amanda," every single time it said, "Call abandoned." It was very, very frustrating. And it must be frustrating for Jesus when his disciples fail to hear what he's saying, and for us now when we fail or misinterpret what he's saying. The church, sadly, also has a history of failing to listen or claiming to listen and have heard what God says in order to justify their actions. One only has to think about the terrible times of the Crusades, or fighting factions when both sides claim to be fighting for the glory of God, when clearly that can't be right. And if that happens on a national level, it surely happens for us as individuals too. We think we're listening for the voice of God, but then we lay our own interpretation on what we think we've heard. Or it might be, perhaps more commonly, that in fact the voice of God is drowned out by the voices of so many other things clamouring for our attention. The voices of the media, of our society, our culture, all clamouring for our attention, telling us how to spend our money, how to behave, where to go, what to do. It's very hard to recognise sometimes what it is that God wants us to do because it's drowned out in amongst the clamour. But listening for God's voice is really very important, isn't it? We have to listen in order to hear what God is saying. And to know what God is saying, we have to listen carefully and discern that, and then follow. Because Jesus says, "My flock hear and recognise my voice and follow." So if we're going to follow, we need to know where Jesus is going. And the evidence is there in the Gospels. Jesus isn't to be found in the powerhouses and palaces, with the rich, the wealthy and the influential, but with those on the margins, those who are left out, those that no one else is really that interested in, are usually the places where Jesus is found. So if we're listening out for Jesus' voice and we're following where he is, that's where we'll find ourselves too. And it answers the question for us, why do we do what we do? As Christians, why are we helping those in need? Why are we going out of our way to do what's right, to show compassion and mercy? Why are we giving our time, our money, our energy into certain projects? And the answer is not for our own spiritual development and gratification, but because that's where Jesus is calling us. And as a happy byproduct, we develop spiritually as well, anyway, regardless. So let's return to the beginning and recognising that voice. If we say that Jesus is the Messiah, then he has a rule over our lives. We are to listen to his voice. And to listen and to know what he's saying, we have to practice that. And we have to discern carefully where he wants us to go and what he wants us to do. I hope that you listen carefully this week. I'm certainly going to practice a bit harder. Have a good day.